I'm overlooking the Magothy River, and this island behind me is known officially as Dobbins Island, but local legend and the locals refer to it as Dutch Ship Island. The local legend says that there was a Dutch flute which sank here in the early 1600s that gave the island its name. And a flute is an old Dutch sailing ship from the age of sail. So this is one of the most enduring and fun histories of the Magothy River. But is the legend true? This winter, I spent months researching this topic, looking at all the primary evidence I could find. Library of Congress, Maryland State Historical Records, old maps, old deeds. I even cracked the poetry books and checked out some old poems. And what did I find? It's time to get to the bottom of the mystery at the bottom of the Magothy. So there's a lot to this legend, and there's a lot of pieces of it that are very plausible, and I want to break it into different questions and look at them individually. The first question is, were there ever any Dutch ships here at all? And the answer is yes, absolutely, definitely. There were centuries of Dutch navigation in the Chesapeake coming from Europe up the Atlantic to Annapolis and Baltimore. They would have been a very common sight. Seeing a Dutch ship would be like seeing a truck on the highway. So they were everywhere. So that question is a definite yes. Were there ever any Dutch shipwrecks here? Probably. I didn't find any specific historical record of a Dutch wreck exactly on this site. However, there are thousands of shipwrecks throughout the history of the Chesapeake, all up and down, all locations, every year, very common. So totally plausible that some sort of Dutch ship sank in the area. Now, if there was a large flute that sunk right here, you would expect in some of the news records of the time to have seen some sort of evidence of that. However, I didn't see any specific record. Part of the local legend is that Dutch coins and wooden planks washed up on shore, and all the locals will tell you stories of my grandmother's uncle's cousin found some artifacts, and I wanted to look into that as well. I didn't find any direct evidence, and I actually didn't even meet anyone who had any of these artifacts themselves. But I'm going to give the locals the benefit of the doubt on this one. Dutch coins are actually an artifact that you can find in the Chesapeake Bay, so it's not that far-fetched. And as for wooden planks, on nearly every beach in the Chesapeake Bay, you will find a wooden plank that very well could have come from a wooden shipwreck that's still at the bottom of the bay somewhere. However, these timbers, they're called disarticulated timbers, they can float for hundreds of miles. So just because you find one on a beach doesn't mean there's a ship right off that beach. So we will again say this is possible. We'll give the locals the benefit of the doubt, but I didn't see any direct evidence. So you can tell my skepticism is starting to creep in. So what about this nickname, Dutch Ship Island? Is there any historical evidence that this is even a historical name? And actually, yes, absolutely. This name goes back, again, probably hundreds of years. The earliest mention I could find is from the 1800s. It was actually a classified ad for some sort of day trip from Baltimore to the Magothy. But the point is, it is a historical name. Now, there's nothing about this name connecting it to a wreck, but it has been used for, again, hundreds of years. The official name of the island, as far as I can tell, though, has never been Dutch Ship. The original land grant from 1769 to William Dobbin, it calls it the Great Island, so nothing about the Dutch Ship Island. And then there's also a record from about 1851 when the island was sold, and at that point it was referred to as Dobbins Island. But I didn't see anything in those records relating it to Dutch ships. So I don't think this was ever an official name. I think this was probably always a local name, or maybe for the mariners in the area, a name they would use to refer to the island. But what about, there is a shipwreck marked on the nautical chart. If you look at the NOAA chart of this area, there's a wreck marked right off the southeast tip of Dobbins. I went out in my kayak with a high-resolution side-scan sonar to produce images of the seabed to check out that wreck in the area. And I scanned everything around the island. And there is a wreck there, there absolutely is. And I got great images of it, and I shared it with state officials. And their interpretation was this is probably a recent wreck. And if you look when it was originally charted, which was sometime in the 50s, I believe, they referred to it as a wooden deck barge. And the state's interpretation was again consistent with a wooden deck barge. So there is a wreck there. However, it's modern. And I suspect that that wreck kind of got caught up in the oral telling of the legend, and it grew into a Dutch shipwreck. So then why does the island have this name, Dutch Ship Island? My theory is I think it's related to the island's shape, which is very unique. If you look at the 1769 land patent, they traced the boundaries of the island, and it really is shaped like a Dutch flute. And if you compare that to a painting of a Dutch flute from the time, you can really see the shapes are nearly identical. The fact that a flute would have been a really common sight, and other islands in the area are also named after their shape. For example, Great Fox Island, there's Half Moon Island, and probably several others in the bay. That's a very normal way to name an island. But there's even more evidence that supports my theory. There's a poet that wrote a lot about the Magothy River, and his name is Folger Mackenzie. And if you live in Severna Park, you might be familiar with Folger Mackenzie Elementary School, who is named after him. He wrote a poem called Dutch Ship Island, and one of the lines from his verse of poetry describes the island as like a Dutch ship fashioned, which I read as an old-timey way of saying it's shaped like a Dutch ship. Furthermore, all the period references to the island that I could find, there's many that reference its shape. They will say this island is known as the Dutch ship, or they'll talk about its wondrous shape. But I have not seen, again, any reference to a specific wreck. So my interpretation of all this, I don't really think that there's a Dutch flute in the Magothy right now. However, like I said before, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Maybe it did sink, maybe that is where the name came from, and maybe the evidence is lost to history. What do you think?